The roar of the heavy engines drowned out the frantic pounding of my heart as the armored sport utility vehicle sped away from my burning world. Tearing through the snow-covered streets of Brooklyn, I pressed my forehead against the cold, bulletproof glass window, watching the familiar silhouette of my family's pharmacy dissolve into the swirling winter mist while tears of pure betrayal burned the backs of my eyes. Beside me, Vincent Cassano sat in absolute, terrifying stillness, his profile chiseled from dark granite as he stared straight ahead. His leather-gloved fingers wrapped so tightly around his phone that the plastic casing groaned under the immense pressure. He had not looked at me since his lieutenant uttered the name of my uncle, nor had he offered a single word of comfort to mitigate the devastating truth that my own flesh and blood had sold him out to a rival faction. The silence inside the luxurious leather cabin was a suffocating monster, stretching for miles as the vehicle crossed the bridge and left the familiar confines of the city behind, plunging deep into the secluded, wealthy expanses of Long Island. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the heavy vehicle slowed, navigating a winding private road lined with towering, skeletal trees before passing through massive, wrought iron security gates that shut with a definitive metallic clang. A vast, sprawling estate materialized from the darkness, a fortress of limestone and dark glass that radiated an oppressive aura of ancient wealth and total isolation. The vehicle pulled into the massive circular driveway, where a dozen men in identical dark wool suits immediately stood at attention, their expressions severe as they secured the perimeter. The lieutenant threw the door open, offering a hand that I completely ignored as I stepped out into the freezing wind, my boots sinking 3 inches deep into the fresh snow while I clutched my canvas tote bag against my chest like a shield. Vincent climbed out right behind me, his towering 6'2" frame instantly cutting off the draft as he stepped into my path, his smoke-gray eyes burning with a dark, unreadable intensity under the grand entry lights. "This is your home until the threat is neutralized, Valerie Clara. And you will not step outside these gates without my explicit permission." I glared up at him, my lower lip trembling with a volatile mixture of anger and exhaustion as I adjusted the damp knit scarf around my neck. "This is not a home, Vincent, it is a gilded cage. And you are treating me like a prisoner because of a crime I did not commit." Vincent did not blink, his strong jaw tightening as he slid his leather glove off, his fingers reaching out to firmly but gently grasp my chin, forcing me to maintain contact with his piercing gaze. "A prisoner would be in the basement, Valerie. You are in my sanctuary because the outside world currently considers you a walking target. Your uncle made a deal with monsters, and until I find him, your safety is the only currency I care about." He released his hold, turning on his heel with predatory fluidity to march toward the massive oak doors of the mansion, leaving his men to escort me into the suffocating luxury of my new reality. The massive oak doors of the Long Island estate shut behind me with a heavy, hollow thud that echoed through the grand limestone entrance hall, signaling the start of a torturous 24 hours of absolute isolation. I spent the entire next day pacing the perimeter of the cavernous master bedroom, my leather boots clicking restlessly against the dark hardwood floors as the winter sun tracked a slow, mocking arc across the floorboards. The luxury that surrounded me, the king-sized bed wrapped in Egyptian silk, the marble fireplace crackling with scented firewood, and the panoramic windows overlooking 30 acres of private, snow-covered grounds, felt like a beautifully designed insult to my sanity. Vincent Cassano had vanished completely the moment we entered the house, leaving me with nothing but my racing thoughts and the terrifying knowledge that my uncle had unleashed a war. Every time I tried to venture down the sweeping grand staircase, a broad-shouldered guard dressed in a flawless dark wool suit would materialize from the shadows, hands folded formally in front of his chest as his unblinking eyes conveyed a polite but utterly immovable barrier. By 9 o'clock in the evening, the suffocating quiet of the estate was driving me to the brink of madness, my medical instincts screaming at the lack of routine while my heart ached with the sting of my family's betrayal. I stopped my pacing near the high-arched windows, watching the heavy snow gather on the branches of the skeletal pine trees outside, my reflection in the dark glass revealing a pale, exhausted woman who looked entirely out of place in a Mafia stronghold. A sudden, soft rap on the wooden door frame made me spin around, my fingers digging into the fabric of my cream wool sweater as the massive, scarred lieutenant stepped into the room, holding a silver tray with a porcelain teapot. He didn't look me in the eye. Instead, he kept his gaze respectfully lowered to the floor as he carefully set the tray down on the mahogany side table. The boss has not returned to the estate, Miss Clara, but he explicitly ordered that you be served chamomile tea from your own pharmacy stock before the night concluded. I stepped toward him, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and desperate anxiety, as I gestured toward the locked double doors at the end of the corridor. I do not want tea, Marco. I want answers. Is my uncle still breathing, or has Vincent already executed his version of underworld justice on my family? Marco adjusted his dark silk tie, his severe features remaining completely unreadable as he took a step back toward the exit, his posture rigid with absolute loyalty to the Cassano name. Mr. Cassano is currently conducting a thorough investigation into the rival faction's logistics, and he does not share the details of his operations with anyone, especially not those who are directly connected to the breach. He bowed his head slightly and retreated into the hallway, closing the door behind him and leaving me once again with the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock and the unbearable weight of my own helplessness. I sank onto the edge of the silk-covered mattress, burying my face in my hands as the reality of my situation grew heavier with every passing minute, realizing that I was no longer a savior or an equal in Vincent's eyes, but merely a dangerous liability wrapped in a gilded cage. The grandfather clock down the corridor struck midnight, its deep, resonant chime vibrating through the heavy oak floors of my lavish prison cell. I remained awake, sitting cross-legged on the massive silk-covered mattress with my back pressed against the headboard, my eyes wide and strained from staring at the flickering shadows cast by the dying fireplace. The porcelain teapot on the side table had long since gone cold, a bitter testament to the agonizing hours that had ticked away while my mind played a torturous loop of worst-case scenarios regarding my family. Suddenly, the soft click of the bedroom door latch cut through the stillness, making me sit up completely straight as a cold wave of adrenaline flooded my veins. The door swung inward smoothly, and Vincent Cassano stepped into the dim room, his towering 6'2" silhouette immediately absorbing what little light remained in the space. The expensive sandalwood scent that usually accompanied him was masked by the harsh, biting smell of tobacco smoke, and the undeniable chill of the winter storm raging outside. He did not immediately speak. Instead, he unbuttoned his heavy dark wool overcoat and tossed it onto a velvet armchair, revealing a pristine white dress shirt that looked jarringly bright against the surrounding gloom. He walked toward the edge of the bed with slow, deliberate strides, his smoke-gray eyes locked onto mine with a fierce, burning intensity that seemed to peel away every layer of defense I had left. I pulled my knees tighter against my chest, my voice a raspy whisper that sounded entirely foreign to my own ears in the quiet room. You have been gone for 24 hours, Vincent, leaving me to rot in this mansion while your soldiers treat me like a criminal suspect. Vincent stopped at the foot of the bed, his strong jaw tightening as he reached up to loosen his dark silk tie with a slow, weary tug of his fingers. He leaned his hands flat against the mahogany footboard, bringing his chiseled face into the faint glow of the fireplace embers, exposing the dark circles of exhaustion beneath his eyes. You are not a suspect, Valerie Clara, and if my men treated you with anything less than absolute reverence, they will be answering to me before the sun rises. I slid off the opposite side of the mattress, my boots hitting the hardwood with a sharp thud as I rounded the bed to stand 3 feet away from him, my chin tilting upward defiantly. Then stop hiding behind your empire and look at me. Did you find my uncle? And is he still alive? Or did your version of family honor involve a shallow grave in the New York woods? Vincent straightened to his full height, his broad shoulders squaring as he took a single powerful step toward me, closing the distance between us until I could feel the heat radiating from his chest. He reached out, his bare fingers surprisingly warm as they wrapped securely around my upper arms, holding me in place with an unyielding but careful grip that left no room for escape. His gray eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a rare glimpse of genuine torment rippling beneath his severe mask before his features hardened into a cold, protective resolve. Your uncle is currently in my custody, Valerie, and the only reason his heart is still pumping blood is because your hands were the ones that saved mine during that storm. Do not mistake my restraint for weakness, because my world demands his termination, but my soul is currently begging me not to break the only woman who matters to me. The morning sun broke through the heavy velvet curtains of the estate, casting long geometric spears of light across the hardwood floor, but the pristine winter view offered absolutely no comfort to the storm raging inside my head. I sat at a massive mahogany dining table on the first floor, staring blankly at a silver platter of untouched breakfast, while the distant ticking of a grandfather clock counted down the seconds of my captivity. Vincent had departed again at dawn, leaving behind an atmosphere so thick with unspoken danger that even the air felt heavy to breathe. When the heavy double doors of the dining hall creaked open, I braced myself for Vincent's towering silhouette, but it was Marco who stepped inside instead, his face a grim mask of absolute sobriety as he held a pristine leather folder beneath his arm. The massive lieutenant walked with a slow, deliberate stride, stopping 3 feet from my chair and extending his hand to place a series of official-looking financial printouts onto the table right beside my plate. I looked up at him, my brow furrowing as I noticed a prominent logo from an underground Atlantic City casino stamped at the top of the foremost document. What is the meaning of this, Marco? If Vincent sent you to intimidate me with financial records, he is wasting his energy. Marco adjusted the cuffs of his dark suit jacket, his eyes avoiding mine as he focused on the paperwork, a rare hint of genuine sympathy softening his severe expression for a fraction of a second. The boss did not send me to intimidate you, Miss Clara. He is currently occupied with the syndicate heads, but I believed you deserved to understand the exact anatomy of the betrayal that brought us here. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled the papers closer, my eyes scanning columns of astronomical figures, unpaid markers, and final notices that all bore a single, devastating signature at the bottom. This is a debt ledger, Marco. My uncle owes over $600,000 to an organization that does not accept payment plans. Marco leaned forward slightly, resting his large hands flat on the polished wood surface, his low voice carrying the absolute gravity of a man who had seen this tragic story play out 100 times before in the shadows of New York. He owed that money to the rival faction, Valerie, and when he could not produce the cash by the midnight deadline last Tuesday, they offered him a very specific alternative to a permanent cement shoes burial. Your uncle did not just stumble into a bad situation. He actively traded the precise logistics of Mr. Cassano's travel routes and the location of your pharmacy just to erase his own gambling mistakes. The papers slipped from my numbed fingers, fluttering back onto the silver tray like dying leaves as a wave of intense nausea washed over me, completely draining the remaining color from my face. I clutched the edges of the chair for support, my medical headspace completely shattered by the realization that my family had not been an accidental victim in this underworld war, but the literal architects of the violence that had bleeding men collapsing onto my linoleum floor. He knew what they would do to Vincent, Marco. He knew they would bring weapons to my doorstep, and he still signed his name to it. Marco straightened his spine, his features instantly hardening back into his default armor of professional finality, as he picked up the folder and took a step back toward the exit. In our world, Valerie, that is not a mistake. That is an execution order, and Mr. Cassano is currently deciding whether to honor your mercy or enforce the ancient law of the family. The sudden sharp ringing of my cell phone on the polished mahogany table shattered the heavy silence of the dining hall like a gunshot. I jumped slightly, my hand flying to my throat as the screen illuminated the darkroom, displaying an unknown, encrypted number that made my stomach twist into a tight knot. Marco was already halfway out the double doors, but he stopped instantly, his entire body freezing into a rigid stance as his sharp eyes locked onto the vibrating device before darting to my pale face. I reached out, my fingers trembling violently as I slid the bar to answer, pressing the cold glass against my ear while the distant roar of the winter wind outside seemed to fade into nothingness. A ragged, desperate sob immediately flooded the line, accompanied by the echo of heavy footsteps on concrete, and the faint hum of an old industrial ventilation fan. Valerie, oh dear God, Valerie, you have to help me, you have to talk to him, please, you are the only one he will listen to. I clutched the edge of the table, the raw panic in my uncle's voice making my breath hitch as a cold sweat broke out across my collarbone. Uncle Julian, where are you? What have you done? Marco just showed me the ledger from Atlantic City. Another choked wail escaped his throat, followed by the sound of him scrambling against what sounded like a metal pipe, his words tumbling out in a frantic, incoherent rush. They caught me at the bus terminal, Valerie. Vincent's men, they dragged me down into some warehouse cellar near the shipyard. And they are going to end me, I know they are. But you saved his life, Valerie, you stitched him up when he was bleeding out on your floor, so he owes you everything. Tell him to let me go. Tell him I will leave the country. Just use your leverage to swap my life for what you did for him. I stood up from the chair, my knees nearly buckling beneath me as the absolute selfishness of his plea registered in my mind, my free hand clenching into a tight fist against my denim jeans. You sold me out, Julian. You gave them the address of the pharmacy. You put a target on my back just to save yourself from a gambling debt. And now you want me to use my medical oath as a bargaining chip for your survival. Before he could utter another desperate lie, the line abruptly went dead with a sharp metallic click, leaving nothing but the hollow drone of a disconnected signal. I slowly lowered the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird as I looked across the room at Marco, who had already pulled out his own tactical device to trace the transmission. The door at the far end of the hall swung open with immense force, and Vincent Cassano stepped into the space, his long black overcoat billowing behind him as he brought the freezing air of the outside world into the room. His smoke-gray eyes locked onto the phone in my hand with a lethal, unyielding focus that told me he had heard every single word of the conversation from his own monitor. Vincent Cassano strode deeper into the dining hall, the frozen condensation on his dark wool lapels melting under the warm chandelier light as his imposing 6'2" frame effectively commanded the entire room. He stopped right before me, a heavy black fountain pen gripped between his large leather-gloved fingers while a thick leather-bound ledger lay open on the mahogany table, its freshly inked columns representing the unyielding judgment of the underworld. Marco retreated toward the exit with a respectful inclination of his head, closing the heavy doors with a soft click that left the two of us completely alone in the tense silence. I stepped forward, my boots clicking against the polished wood as I reached out and placed my hand flat over the document, my fingers covering the names of the syndicate banks to block his view. He is an absolute coward, Vincent, and he broke my heart by selling out my pharmacy, but you cannot execute a man in cold blood using the hands that I labored to save during that storm. Vincent did not look down at the paper. Instead, his piercing smoke-gray eyes locked onto mine with an unyielding gravity that sent a visible tremor through my shoulders. He slowly removed his leather glove, tossing it onto the table before placing his bare, warm palm over the back of my hand, his grip firm but careful as he pulled my fingers away from the ledger. Your medical headspace does not apply to the asphalt of New York, Valerie Clara. Because a man who sells my travel routes to a rival faction creates an infection that will eventually spread and destroy my entire family. I held my ground, tilting my chin upward to bridge our height difference while my pulse raced frantically beneath my scrub top. I am a physician, Vincent, and my entire existence is dedicated to preserving life, not validating your primitive blood feuds. If you execute my uncle using information you obtained because I took a bullet out of your flank, then you are turning my sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. Vincent leaned forward, bringing his chiseled face mere inches from mine, his jaw tightening with a volatile mixture of frustration and a strange, hidden vulnerability that he always tried to suppress. He risked your life, Valerie. He put a dozen armed assassins outside your frosted glass windows just to erase his own gambling mistakes at an Atlantic City casino. If I allow a traitor to walk away unscratched out of some misplaced sense of romantic sentiment, then I lose the respect of every soldier standing outside those iron gates. I grabbed the lapels of his tailored suit jacket, my eyes flashing with a desperate, fiery determination as I refused to back down from the silent king who ruled millions through fear. Then do not do it for sentiment, Vincent, do it for the vow you made to me under the falling snow when you said I was the only boundary you would never cross. Break your ancient laws just this once, or look me in the eye right now and admit that your empire means more to you than the soul you asked me to heal. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the dining hall felt like a hammer striking an anvil during the agonizing silence that stretched between us. My fingers remained tightly clamped around the lapels of Vincent Cassano's tailored suit jacket, my frantic breath stuttering against his white collar as I waited for the absolute hammer of his underworld authority to fall on my head. He did not pull away. Instead, his towering 6'2" frame remained completely immobilized, his smoke-gray eyes darkening to the color of a stormy Atlantic Sea as my ultimatum penetrated his hardened defense. Slowly, the heavy black fountain pen slipped from his bare fingers, rolling across the leather-bound ledger before dropping onto the mahogany table with a soft, definitive clack. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, his chest expanding with a deep, shuddering breath that signaled a tectonic shift inside his legendary armor. When his eyelids lifted, The lethal glare of the syndicate boss had vanished, replaced by an intense, terrifying devotion that made my knees tremble against the wooden floorboards. He reached into his trouser pocket and retrieved a sleek, secure satellite phone, tapping the screen twice with his thumb before lifting the device to his ear, his gaze remaining locked onto mine with an unblinking focus. "Marco, stand down at the shipyard facility immediately, because the target Julian is no longer an execution matter for the family." I let out a long, shaky breath, my hands losing their grip on his jacket as a profound wave of relief washed over my exhaustion, but Vincent caught my wrists before I could step back, his bare palms holding me in place with an unyielding warmth. He did not disconnect the call. Instead, his voice dropped to a low, gravelly vibration that carried a new permanent set of instructions for his entire organization. "Listen to me very carefully. Marco, you will seize every asset, every bank account, and every property deed currently registered under Julian's name to settle the Atlantic City Casino debt in full. Once the paperwork is processed, put him on a one-way cargo vessel bound for the deepest ports of South America, and inform him that if his boots ever touch the concrete of the United States again, the original contract will be fulfilled within 60 seconds. Vincent tossed the phone onto the open ledger, his hand sliding up my arms to cup my face with an intense, possessive gentleness that completely defied the tattered laws of his empire. For 70 years the Cassano name has been written in absolute, unyielding blood, Valerie Clara. But today I have completely broken my family's foundation just to keep your hands clean. Your uncle will live. He will breathe the air of a distant continent, but he is dead to this city, and he is entirely removed from your life." I leaned my cheek into his warm palm, my eyes closing as the sheer magnitude of his sacrifice registered in my chest, realizing that the silent king had officially surrendered his crown to the resident doctor who had stitched him up in a midnight storm. The heavy tension that had held the grand dining hall hostage for hours finally began to dissipate, leaving behind a profound, soft stillness that wrapped around us like the winter blanket coating the Long Island estate outside. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, resting my forehead against Vincent Cassano's solid chest, listening to the rhythmic, powerful thudding of his heart beneath his white dress shirt as my own breathing finally slowed down to a normal pace. The immediate threat of blood vengeance had passed, but the sheer gravity of what had just occurred remained fully suspended in the air. Vincent did not step away. Instead, his large hands slid down from my face to wrap completely around my waist, his long fingers anchoring me against his towering 6'2" frame with a quiet, fierce protectiveness that felt entirely permanent. He leaned his chin gently against the top of my head, his chest expanding with a deep sigh as his gaze drifted toward the high-arched windows where the morning sun was reflecting brightly off the pristine white snow. "You asked me to choose between my crown and your soul, Valerie, and I want you to look around this fortress and understand that every brick means absolutely nothing if you are not standing inside them with me." I slowly pushed back just a few inches, my hands sliding down his broad shoulders to rest flat against his chest as I looked up into his smoke-gray eyes, which had softened into an intense, dark devotion that completely captivated my senses. "I never wanted to change your world, Vincent, and I never asked to be a queen in a kingdom built on secrets. But I needed to know that the man I saved still possessed a shred of humanity beneath his armor." Vincent tilted his head, a ghost of a genuine, rare smile touching the corners of his chiseled lips as his thumb reached out to trace a slow, warm path across my lower lip, his voice dropping to a low melodic vibration that vibrated straight through my bones. "My humanity died in the alleyways of Manhattan 15 years ago, Valerie Clara, but the very second your warm hands pressed against my bleeding flesh in that midnight storm, you officially became my resurrection. You are no longer just a resident doctor who happened to stumble into a Mafia territory war. You are the single boundary line that keeps me anchored to the living world, and I will spend every breath I have left ensuring that no one ever crosses that line again." He pulled me back into his embrace, his strong arms tightening around my sweater as he buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling the faint, soothing scent of chamomile that still clung to my skin despite the chaos of the last 48 hours. I wrapped my arms tightly around his neck, finally surrendering to the overwhelming truth that my quiet life at the Brooklyn pharmacy was gone forever, replaced by the dangerous, protective warmth of a silent king who had willingly broken his own ancient laws just to keep me safe by his side. By late afternoon, the golden rays of the winter sun began to recede from the massive windows of the estate, casting long, dramatic shadows across Vincent Cassano's private first-floor study. Vincent had left for a brief security briefing with his captains at the main gate, leaving me alone to gather my scattered belongings and the financial records Marco had provided earlier. I stepped into the cavernous room, the scent of old leather and expensive tobacco instantly enveloping my senses as my boots clicked softly against the intricate Persian rug. I walked toward his massive mahogany desk, intending to stack the paperwork neatly, when my knee inadvertently bumped against the lower wooden panel of the desk, causing a subtle, metallic click to echo in the quiet space. A hidden, spring-loaded drawer at the very base of the desk slid outward by 2 inches, revealing a secret compartment that looked entirely separate from his official business files. My curiosity as a medical investigator piqued. I knelt onto the rug, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled the drawer completely open, expecting to find encrypted drives or syndicate ledger keys. Instead, resting on top of a velvet lining was a small green plastic butterfly hair clip, its cheap surface instantly recognizable because it belonged to me during my first year of residency. Beneath the hair clip lay a thick manila folder, its edges worn and yellowed, with my full legal name typed neatly across the front tab in stark black lettering. I opened the folder, my breath instantly freezing in my throat as a dozen high-resolution photographs spilled onto my lap, capturing my life from exactly 5 years ago. There were images of me walking across the New York University campus with a stack of medical textbooks, images of me buying coffee at a local Brooklyn deli, and even close-up shots of me studying beneath a dim library lamp. This was not a recent surveillance folder compiled after the midnight shootout at my pharmacy. This was a comprehensive, meticulously documented archive spanning half a decade of my existence. A sudden, heavy footstep sounded right outside the study doors, followed by the deep, low vibration of Vincent's voice as he concluded his conversation with his lieutenant in the corridor. Ensure the perimeter guards maintain their positions through the night, Marco, because my focus remains entirely inside this house. The heavy brass door handle slowly began to turn, the metallic mechanism groaning in the silence while the photographs remained scattered across my lap like pieces of a terrifying, beautiful puzzle. My heart hammered against my ribs as the realization washed over me that our fateful encounter during that brutal storm had not been a coincidence at all, but a calculated arrival. Vincent stepped into the room, his long dark overcoat sweeping around his boots as his smoke-gray eyes immediately locked onto the open drawer, and the student photos gripped tightly in my trembling hands.